part one of our series, I'm Good, Not Really, we talked about the shadow side of success. And I'm so happy to have Melissa King with us today. Melissa King is a counselor with Tapestry Psychological Associates. I'm so glad I got that right. Yeah. And we'd love to have your input because you have a unique vantage point as a counselor, talking to many people in our community in East Cobb and Marietta and North Atlanta generally about some of these issues related to success and maybe the shadow side of success. So let me frame it this way. We live in a community where people put a lot of emphasis on education, on climbing the ladder at work, on sports and their kids being all-star performers in dance and sports and a number of these activities. In what ways do you see that pressure showing up in the lives of people, families, kids in our community?
Yeah, I do see that. I work with children, like elementary age, I work with middle school, high school, and then I also work with some adult women as well. So I feel like I see it from all vantage points of how it affects kids and then how it also affects moms. You know, I don't work with the dads quite as much, but I do some parenting
work. And you are a mom.
I am a mom. I have 3 children. So I have an 8th grader, I'm like, get it right, 4th grader, 3rd grader.
Yeah. So right in the middle of it.
So I see, I'm in the middle of trying to make all these decisions myself. But yeah, I do see, what I say is this whole keeping up with the Joneses, mentality has really, I think it's taken off to a different level in a lot of ways. And so our culture is, and especially where we live, is fast-paced, like you were saying. It's very driven. People are very driven and wanting to see excellence. And so the things that I see in my office as a result of that are kids and teenagers and adults with more anxiety, facing more perfectionistic kind of thinking where they are really having trouble processing making mistakes or a fear of failure. And I feel like that would often be more of an adult issue, but I'm seeing that with really young kids as well, where they are very fearful of getting B's, even at elementary school level where that doesn't count. I mean it does, but it's not like high school transcript. But I'm seeing that in sports because of the high level sports that kids are playing. There's pressure. And so I have a middle school boy on my caseload right now who's actually a really good basketball player, but he is so perfectionistic in his thinking that anytime he makes a mistake during a game, the resilience to be able to push through that is so difficult for him that then he'll end up shutting down, and not performing at all because of the fear that comes into that. So I see, anxiety in different levels when it's grades or school related. Sometimes I see kids who start to refuse to go to school because they're anxious, or they'll start to avoid different activities. So that's kind of some of the things that I do see in my office.
And you mentioned some of these, but what are some of those signs that parents might see in children that could be indicators that we might need to seek some help in this particular area?
Yeah, I would say, and this is even we'll talk about anxiety more, but even in the diagnostic criteria that clinicians use to diagnose, one of the major things that you see in kids and adults is sleep disturbances, where a lot of these kids will have trouble falling asleep, they'll have trouble staying asleep, and that can be true of adults as well that are struggling with anxiety, but also avoidance of normal activities or withdrawal. In younger kids, you start to see more separation anxiety, where they were fine going to school or they were fine going to church, and then all of a sudden they're fearful to leave mom and dad. They don't want to go do extra things. Because that's kind of a common response for that elementary age. And even sometimes middle school, I'll see that start happening again in middle school when anxiety gets higher.
Achievement is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Ambition is not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
But we're talking about the shadow side of it. And I do think that there is an underbelly of issues in a very high-achieving, high-pressure world. One of the ways it manifests itself is in this area of perfectionism. Mm-hmm. So I guess what is perfectionism, and then what drives that in someone's life, or what can drive that in someone's life?
Yeah. Perfectionism, like most anxiety, because it's a subset of anxiety. Most people who struggle with perfectionism struggle with anxiety on some level, or they are anxious. And so it's really an irrational thought if you think about it, but you convince yourself, like most anxiety, but you convince yourself that it's rational, that it's something you can control. because they're really, if you kind of back it down, and I think most people would agree, they would say perfectionism is not, and being perfect is not achievable. But when you are so kind of thrown into that mode of thinking, you start to think, okay, well, I'll just control as much as I can, I'll make as much of my life and my circumstances as perfect as possible. And I do think that leads to a lot of striving. And like you were mentioning, kind of that shadow side of ambition. And to me, when I think about ambition, like you were saying, like the Lord calls us to excellence and he calls us to do things, with excellence, but I think it's unto his glory. And so then when we start to move into that striving, and I think into an unhealthy ambition, we are moving into glorifying ourselves, trying to present an image for man's approval rather than God's approval. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think it's really a fine line. And I would say myself, I am about something I struggle with is that perfectionistic mindset. I probably did as a teenager all the way through. But it's a very fine line of wanting to be successful and being driven, because I can relate to that. Like I like to do things well that I do. I like to, put my best foot forward. But if you're putting all of your identity in that and bringing glory to yourself and looking for people to applaud you and praise you, it can quickly turn into an unhealthy, destructive behavior.
Interesting that you talk about control being one of those key motivators for trying to appear perfect. And I guess that's the opposite of faith. Controlling all things is not allowing God to, not surrendering to him. The series that we're in right now is called I'm Good, Not Really. And the premise is a lot of people in our area, if you say, how you doing? I'm good, I'm fine. And we live in an era that tries to project images of success and beauty and power and all these things. But quite often, people aren't doing fine under the surface. And is that a new thing? Is it a more pronounced thing? Does social media contribute to that? What are some of those contributing factors that lead to this pressure to be and do all things?
Yeah, and that's something I think about a lot. I mean, because I did grow up as a teenager not having social media and all that. And I always tell my own kids, I said, I'm very thankful that I did not have that to have to deal with, but because I do think that is an added pressure. But I mean, if you think back, I mean, even in the Bible, they're addressing vanity and, things. So there was obviously, that's human nature, it's part of the fall. But I would say social media for sure adds an element of that because it's in your face constantly if you're on social media. And if you're on, I mean, there is always I think it's normal on social media for people to put their best foot forward, but and it's really normal for a teenager whose brain is not fully developed to see that and not be able to see the nuance behind every person has struggles. It doesn't matter how clean or, perfect and flashy their life may look, they're a human. So everybody is struggling on some level. But it does create this dynamic of that is hard to negate if that's what you're seeing constantly, if that makes sense.
If you're meeting with a child or a parent or both, and you see the struggle, they admit the struggle, and they're looking for, what do I do? What are some of these common next steps that you might give to a family to help them find freedom?
Yeah. Well, I would say one thing is, as you mentioned, like sports and education and just the pressures that these kids are feeling. And I think even
because let's just interrupt.
Yeah.
It's amazing that people are now having their kids specialize in a sport when they're 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
We have a good friend who's a physical therapist who's seeing a number of injuries just because of the repeated use of muscles at a very young age, just because kids aren't as well-rounded physically as they used to be because they're dialed into this one sport. And of course, everybody's kid is going to make the major leagues. Everyone's daughter is going to be an Olympic gymnast.
Yeah.
But by law of averages, most of them are not.
Right.
And so parents are faced with this, what do we do? Because the culture is like, you have to be all in, and we don't want to quit the sport. It's just so complicated.
It really is. And I will say that coming as a counselor, I see it, and like as a parent, I see that. We've had to make choices for our kids of can they move forward just doing, there's not a lot of in between, like you were saying, there's not a lot of opportunity for a kid who just wants to try a sport at 8 for the first time because that 8-year-old, let's say, has been playing baseball since he was 4, and then they're on a team. And there are some recreational opportunities, but I do think there is such high pressure in sports, like you were saying, and I see it in education. And I would say one thing I really try to like when you say practical steps to help parents, when a family comes to me or, a parent, for sure. Well, whenever I see a child or a teenager, I always meet with parents first without the child or the teen present, just to kind of get a good snapshot of what's going on. And so I'm always trying to understand what's going on in the family dynamic and how busy they are and what's going on. And I think that's a lot of what I see is these parents feeling backed into a corner of, but there's no other option. This is what we have to do. We have to have this busy schedule because this one's a gymnast and this one plays soccer. And what I always tell parents, for one, is it's really important to parent the child that you have and not the child that you wish that you had or that you wish they would be, because I do see a lot of parents pushing kids when kids are not even really wanting to sometimes do all of these things, but they will think that, well, we want them to be well-rounded. So we do have them playing guitar and learning voice lessons and playing soccer and then they have to play elite level soccer and they have, it's just, it creates a chaotic environment for the family, because then you are every single day in your car driving your kid or 3 kids or wherever to all these different places. And so anyway, I see the dilemma, but that's one thing that I always practically start with families, if they will receive it and just say, let's pause and step back and really evaluate what your values are and what kind of legacy you want to leave for your family. And then try to make decisions according to that. And sometimes that is saying no to certain things and backing away and trying to figure out what you need to do. But I just think that so much of that can lead to a chaotic environment, which can lead to more anxiety.
Hard to do.
It is hard. It is, yeah.
Last question. One of the things that we have to do as believers is to embrace the God-given limitations that we have as gifts.
Yes.
And by that I just mean that we can't do all things. We can't be everywhere. We can't please everybody. We can't appear. We have limitations.
That's right.
How are those a gift that can help us depend more on God and to draw our strength and identity and approval from Him versus where we often try to find those things?
Yeah. Well, and I can speak from personal experience because I'm a doer and I'm a let's get it done. Yeah. And I will say, like I said, I have 3 kids and I just felt like the older my kids got, the busier the schedules got, I became more and more in touch with my limitations because I also work. So balancing that as a mom and a working mom. And I will be honest, I feel like most people, I don't like coming in touch with my limitations. I would like to be able to say, no, I can do it all. And I think, kind of to answer your question, to go there, for me, there was a lot of, I would look at my friend, let's say, for example, who even loved the Lord and had great values and all of that, but she might be able to manage more than what I was capable or my capacity was. And so then there would be shame, and I didn't want to, admit that and all of those kinds of things. But I think there's a lot of that going on in our culture of looking at other people around us and trying to make decisions for our family based on what we're seeing somebody else do or their family doing. And so I think that always leads us down a path that's not healthy, because the honest truth is my limits might be very different than my friend's limits. And so I have to be self-aware and I have to be honest about that to say, well, our family can't function at that level because we just don't do well when we're at that level. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
But I would say, I think that takes some self-awareness and reflection to kind of really lean in and say, all right, Lord, these are my limitations, or this is our family's limitations, and this is really as far as we can go right now.
We have to evaluate our lives in light of God's purposes and the story that we want to write for our families. Well, we're so grateful for you, Melissa, for helping us with this conversation, particularly on this idea of ambition. And we'll have a link in the show notes of how people can get in touch with you or Tapestry. And I'm so grateful for you and a number of just wonderful Christian counselors that we have as a resource to help us to live the healthy life that God wants us to have. So we're grateful for you, and so glad you came here to be with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.